All right. So, this is the conclusion on our series on spiritual offices. Now, to be clear, before we dig into kind of conclude, kind of bringing this whole thing full circle, this is in no way, shape, or form the full spectrum and like the full breakdown of everything that you could possibly learn or need to know. I don't actually have that information for you. I'm still learning. And that's the thing, is that this is a kind of sociological concept in the church that God has designed that would require like a deeper, more clear understanding of that comes from time with God and comes from experience with the church. I have a lot that I can share, I have a lot that I can offer, but I can't offer you the whole thing. So, nevertheless, though, as we go to kind of like talk about this, so the last video we talked about the kind of divides in the church and the necessity of unity, and the way that it wasn't just necessary, but it was even something that Jesus very, very much yearned for to see. He wanted the church functioning in perfect order. Well, we're going to talk about why. Because we've looked at the different offices. We've looked at the church, at the interactions of those offices and where they can conflict and where they can align. But let's stop and talk about, as we usher this out, the final intent, the goal, the way that when all the members of the body are able to sit at the table, everyone can feast and grow. And that is where we need to be. So I'm going to go back. If you ever like watched these messages in like one after the other, I apologize, sort of. I'm not actually sorry, but I say it because I'm trying to be nice. Anyway, but we're going to read Ephesians 4 because it's kind of central to our whole message here. And if you're, like I said, if you've heard this before, but we're going to go through the whole piece here. So Christ himself, starting in 4:11, gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined together and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. That, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him, in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In your anger do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Anyone who has been stealing must no longer, anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they have something to share with those in need. I was supposed to stop before I got there. I was supposed to stop in after verse 27. Anyway, do not give the devil a foothold. So we dig through this chunk a little bit further. We've been kind of ruminating over the offices and what they mean, what it means to be an apostle, a prophet, an evangelist, or a preacher, depending on your translation, a shepherd or pastor, depending on your translation, or a teacher. But we've also talked about how they interact with one another, and it's fascinating because Paul does specifically talk about this thing about like not letting things go down, not letting the sun go down when you're angry with your brother, and not giving the enemy a foothold. Almost as though we're looking at the idea that people are going to clash, because that happens. But we've already talked about that. If you want to dig more into the clashes and disunity that can happen in the body, then go back to the last message, the interactions message. No, we want to look at what Paul is saying to us through this passage, what Jesus prayed for. And that is that unity, that place where we are all functioning together as one body under the head that is Jesus. And I think it's important to visit that concept, because Paul uses the concept of a whole body over and over and over again. And he, even in Ephesians here, I mean, we've been looking at it in 1 Corinthians throughout this series so far. But here in Ephesians, he again harkens back to this idea of all the parts being part of one body, with Jesus being the head. And that's important, because it removes any of those offices from being the person who's completely in charge. This is the first and most important thing. This is the secret to where we all can align. And that is removing our egos and letting Jesus be king. Because see, it is under him. We as a body, we as a unified group, we put Jesus above everything else. He is the ruler of the church. He is the king. He is the pastor. He is the apostle, the prophet. He has all those things. And he carries all those natures within him. Like I said multiple times, every office has a part of God in them. Their heart cry, their passion, that thing that drives them, that really they are always looking to fulfill and satisfy however they go about it. You can have evangelists who can prophesy. You can have evangelists who will lay hands on the sick. You can have evangelists with a vision from God. But you know what that vision's going to look like? It's going to look like souls being saved. Because that is their heart cry. When they prophesy, they're going to prophesy words of knowledge and guidance in order to help people come to salvation. They're not going to go out and try to bring people into deeper intimacy with God, not in the same sense that a prophet will. No, they're going to use that gift in accordance with their heart, which is to save souls, to bring people into the church, to gather. You can have a prophet with a gift of preaching, but you know what they're going to do with that gift? They're going to use it to bring people into deeper intimacy with God. They're going to speak words of knowledge. They're going to speak words of prophecy. They're going to do the whole thing. And yes, words of knowledge and prophecy are different. Now, a whole other topic for another time. But point is, one is about what is seen, and one is about what will be seen. Anyway, the thing about it is that with that gift of preaching, they're going to sit there and they're going to talk. They're going to preach the gospel. They're going to share their knowledge of Jesus and the truth of Jesus Christ. But they're going to share it with the intention of drawing people deeper into him. Showing more of who he is in truth so that people can fall more and more in love with him or understand how in love with them he is. That's how we work. Like every office, they have that piece of their heart that they have received from God, and they're going to go out and they're going to share that. That is going to drive them. But what happens when we get all five working together in conjunction? What happens when the evangelists understand that their role is to gather and they don't judge the shepherds for not gathering? What happens when the shepherds understand that their role is to tend to the lost, tend to those who have been gathered, and to take care of them, to love on them, to build for them, to protect them? And they don't judge the evangelists for being focused on gathering. What happens when we can put aside the differences in our offices, in our mentalities, in order to begin to complement each other and work together? Well, that is when we feast. That is when the body of Christ is finally able to be completely nourished as it nourishes itself. See, what you have then is you have a table set. There are 5 pillars at that table, and everyone else at that table will eat and learn and grow. They will walk away with something incredible, which is a deeper understanding of Jesus, a deeper capacity to grow and mature at a place, at a rate that is significantly more than what we are oftentimes experiencing. Look at the perspective of what we've talked about already. We've talked about how oftentimes churches are separated by individual offices. You'll have a teaching church. You'll have a church that's focused on evangelism. You'll have a church that's focused on outreach, and those are your shepherds, And that's the thing, is that for the individual person, for that one person, that pilgrim who's having to go from church to church in order to gather and in order to grow in the various ways that God has developed us, designed us, because we all are meant to draw from each of those offices. Every one of us, it's not that we're meant to have just one or the other feeding us. We might carry one, but we're meant to be fed by all of them. And that therein lies this thing where that extends out the process of being able to develop and mature, this thing that Paul is talking about, where we develop in maturity, where we're able to mature, where we're no longer like infants tossed about by the waves of the sea. Can you imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to not be tossed around by every bit of calamity that the world offers you? Can you imagine for a moment what it would be like to have a solid, clear picture of who God is and what he's about, because the leaders in your church are not saying opposing messages to one another, but rather one unified message focused on Jesus, focused on his goals and his heart, and each of them manifesting different parts of that heart so that you can draw from all 5 of them all at once and mature and grow that much faster, instead of having to go from church to church for certain periods of time until you get everything that you can out of that one. Then you move to the other one, and then you get whatever you can out of that one, and then you move to the other one, and you get whatever you can out of that one, as the Spirit leads you through this kind of web of different churches that will develop you, hopefully. That's the thing. That's the thing that we don't have. We're all on these journeys that are not necessary. Where Jesus called for greater unity, we have only functioned in division. Jesus' prayer was for the church to be unified, for the body to be unified, for us, the individuals that comprise the church, to be unified. He is the head. He is the one that we're meant to be attached to. No matter who you are, or who you think you are, whatever words you might have from the Lord, or think you have from the Lord, you are not the head. There was one, back when I used to go to Bridgetown, we had some guest speakers come through. There was a series when John Mark Comer was kind of out on sabbatical. And during that period of time, we had a lot of guest pastors come through. And there was one pastor, and I have nothing but respect for how they ran their church. I believe it was the Sedona Church, but I don't remember for sure at this point. I know it was in Washington. But the way that they would pastor their church was this. Every time a big decision came up, they would all convene. The entire church leadership board would convene, and they would pray. And they would pray until the Holy Spirit unified them in seeing what it was that they were supposed to do. They would let Jesus, because as the guy said, whenever people would come to him and ask him at the church, hey, who's the pastor of this church? And they would be like, Jesus. And they'd have to go through this process every time of just like having the person be like, oh, right, yeah, of course. But who's the head pastor? Who's the guy in charge? Well, Jesus. Jesus is the guy in charge. And that's the thing about it, is that like, the reality is that's how it's meant to be. If you believe in Jesus, if you believe in the Bible, then there are a number of things that you have to take into consideration. Number one, you believe that Jesus is king. You say this. Do you believe it? You claim you do. Right. Do you live like that? More importantly, if you're running a church, do you run your church like that? That is how the church is meant to be run. That is the conclusion of the Spiritual Offices series, is that it is meant to be run by Jesus, and under Jesus, through Jesus, as we are all connected to him. He is the head, we are the parts of the body. The offices are the individual parts of the body, and they, when they are unified in him, are functioning fully and completely as one singular body, and there is where they grow. There is where they develop. There is where they do incredible works. Because they're no longer confined by the petty squabbling of what is the right course of action, because they have one singular vision, which is coming from Jesus. He is the central thing. He is the unifying thing. He is the glue that binds the church. And we need to start getting in touch with him, because without him, and mind you, every Christian says the same thing. They say they believe in him. They say that they worship him. And then they look at the Bible, and they study the Bible, and they say that this is who he is. This is who we follow. But you don't. You don't. If you did, then you would look to him for guidance. You would look to him to lead your church. Not look to your own understanding, not look to your own perspective. You would pray and you would wait. And you know what happens? Sometimes decisions come up and they have to be made. You know what's amazing is how much you can make them wait. Sometimes you tell the world that they need to chill, and they need to wait until you hear from God. It might not feel like it, it might be counterintuitive, but everything in worshiping God is counterintuitive to what the world will offer you. The world says these are the only two ways that you can do something. And Jesus says, well, what about the third, fourth, and fifth way that are involved following me? So we start there. We start there with looking at Jesus as the head and following his leadership. That is where we can all align. That is how we can quash the petty squabbles and the kind of debates that happen as the result of different perspectives coming into the room together to function. It starts there. Jesus is the unifying vision of the church. Jesus is the head of the church. If you are leading the church, or if you have pastors who are leading the church on their own, or using the Bible as like a navigation tool, that's not it. That's not it. The Bible itself points to the idea that that Jesus is the head, that we should be following him, that we should be in communion with him. So then what are we doing? What are we doing? And that's how we end up in this situation where we have so much division, because people sharing different perspectives of Jesus. These offices are sharing different hearts of Jesus, but they're different compartments. They need to be aligned and working together, but instead they're separate because they're seeing things. Their heart cry is so different from one another that they cannot hold on and unify, because they're trying to go about it from their own perspective, from their own understanding. Rather than letting Jesus be a guiding light, they're letting their perspective, their heart, be a guiding light. That is folly. So the first thing that we need to understand in order to develop in this is to surrender to Jesus. And you know what happens when you surrender to Jesus? People grow. People come to know him. When people come to a church that's founded on the idea that Jesus is king and actually functions in that, he will take you down strange paths. But people will be blown away. And I can say that from experience. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've done it. I've followed him to places where you couldn't understand like what happened in that room that night, because people were so blown away. Demons were cast off. Trauma was healed. People's entire perspective of life was completely shifted in a new and different way. All because Jesus moved. Because he was allowed to move. Because he was given the entire thing. The entire convention was surrendered to him. That's where we need to be. You as a church, you as a member of the church, will not stop the deceitful scheming of men. You will not stop people from being deceived by people. You will not stop people from being misled by wrong teachings. You will have a part to play. Sometimes you will successfully halt people, but you will not necessarily be the person who inhibits them from ever running into that stuff again. It's too much. There's too much of it out there. There's just too much. I mean, I literally just read about the, what was it? The book of Jesus' wife. That was a passage that people were taking seriously. It was a lie. It was completely forged. And what I mean by forged, I mean they took like 5,000-year-old papyrus and, or not 5,000 years, it was like 2,000-year-old papyrus or something like that. And they wrote this book of Jesus' wife on there, and then posed it up, then put it out there as something that, oh my gosh, look what we found.
Oh my gosh.
And the church scholars were just like, oh my gosh, this is such a fantastic forgery. You know why they knew it was a forgery? Because the entire thing was copied off of a PDF file. and um, a an error in the script that was carried over from the PDF file. Now the Christian historians were able to pick this out, but you know who didn't catch that? The people on the internet going and reading this. So if you hear about the gospel of Jesus's wife, the thing, it was like forged in, what was it? The whole thing was written on a PDF in like 2015 or something like that. It's absurd. It's very, very new. However, the whole thing's fake. And this is why. But this is what I'm talking about, because the thing about it is that that was put out there and people were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Jesus's wife had a gospel. Jesus wasn't even supposed to be married. He wasn't married. He wasn't married at all. But people started to believe that he was married, and they started to question the entire convention of what it was for him to be here and what he did. People were sent into states of deconstruction over this. Wow. A lie. And that's what I'm saying, is that you will never be able to inhibit every single thing unless people are meeting Jesus himself. Your church that just preaches from the Bible really good is not enough. You need more. People need connection to Jesus. You need to be directing people to Jesus, not directing people to the church where they can meet Jesus, not directing people to the places, not providing the food and clothing thing for the people so that they can have an experience of Jesus, not having the intimate moments of worship and praise where people are able to experience the actual fullness of God and his presence as it just descends on the body and everyone starts speaking in tongues. That is not enough. You need it all. Everything that I just said, plus two more. All of that needs to come together, and they need to be experiencing Jesus himself. Those moments are great. You can be like, don't take that as dishonor. All it is to say is that that's not enough to save everybody. The only way for salvation to come is through Christ. He is the one who will save everybody. And we, as the church, as a body, as people who are coming together and unifying around the body, around the lost, the broken, the helpless, the needy, as we are gathering around them and lifting them up, we need to be lifting them up to Jesus, not to our own ideals. This is the beginning. Like I said, this is the start. The start is that we unify around Jesus. That is how we come together. That is how we get past the petty differences between the different members of the different offices. The other part is recognizing the value of those offices. Understand that each one is representing part of Jesus's heart. In that place of representing and honoring each other, you can then take that honor and you can use it to understand that the person across from you is not against you. They complement you. They might be complimenting you in a way that you do not understand. Now, obviously, if they're not understanding what I'm talking about, then maybe they are going against you. But they also need to have their perspective shifted. And that's the thing. If you are working together in the body, if you are coming together in the church to help the sick, to help the wounded, to help the lost, you need to be unifying together. In this place of unification, we can overcome the enemy. The body of Christ is strongest when it is united. The enemy cannot come against that. When we're united with each other and we're following Jesus, we're rock solid. And we're a physical manifestation of Jesus' heart functioning as one whole unit. In different ways, but one whole unit. And therein that's when people stop being tossed around, because suddenly they come here and they find something stable, something that they can hold on to, something that surrounds them and holds them in place. So those waves can't move because the waves can't get through. The waves cannot get through. Even if anything happens, the evangelist will rush out and save that person. Bring them back so that the shepherds can attend to them and the prophets can speak words to them, the teachers can guide them, and the apostles can oversee them. This is the way it is. Think of just that quick little line that I just gave. That gives a base knowledge of what it is that the church is offering when all 5 offices are working in unison in the church to just completely cover each person, to cover them. Suddenly they have a covering. Suddenly they have a safe place, a bubble of safety that can develop them, feed them, grow them. It's like with any kind of animal. If they're taken care of well, they can grow much faster. It's why, farms will raise fish, and those fish will grow 5 to 6 times faster than they would if they were just on their own, out in the wild, trying to fend for themselves, trying to survive. Instead, they're in an enclosure where everyone's taking care of them. They're protected. They're watched over. That is what this is meant to be. The church is meant to be a safe place where people can heal, where people can grow, where people can develop and become mature. And then they themselves can fall into their office and do their own thing as well with that. That is what the church looks like when it's all functioning together. Jesus gives the directions, and the body, the functioning 5-fold ministry, surrounds and covers every person available at the church. It's an incredible thing. It's an incredibly powerful thing because it's complete. It's complete. And that's the thing, is that even when the enemy tries their games, when people come in trying to share like deceitful offerings, deceitful gospels, oftentimes somewhere in that 5-fold, somebody's going to catch on. It's usually going to be the prophets. Sometimes it's not, though. Sometimes I've seen plenty of prophets get misled. But it might be the apostle in that case. It might be the teacher. But somebody in that fortress of different offices, one of them's going to catch on and be like, "This is not from Jesus." Okay? This is not from God. This is not a teaching that we should be carrying on forward with. But that's the thing, is that, and that's the idea. That's the reason for why we do this. This is why this is so important. Why it's worth spending, so many hours doing these messages about. Or over again. We already did this once before. But it was worth redoing it. Mm-hmm. Because this is a key. This is a significant key for how we can overcome the darkness of this world. Jesus in John 17 prays for us to unify. He prays for us to unify. And then we are meant to come together as one body under Him. And in that place of being one powerful body, we have power and strength and cause and clarity. Do you know how much the world needs clarity? How much the world needs strength? Because that's the thing, is that if you are strong, if you are a strong person, people will flock to you. People will be drawn to you. You'll find people hanging around you just because you're safe. You feel safe. And that's enough. That's all they need. That's all that they want, because at the end of the day, everyone is being tossed around, like infants tossed around on the waves, is how Paul describes it, and that's accurate. There are people out there lying to each other, deceiving each other, sharing false gospels, giving false ideas about who Jesus is. When you look at some of the examples in the Bible, even, we're going to pull up Revelation, actually. Revelation 3. Or 2. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, Revelation 2 and 3. So, in Revelation 2 and 3, the angels send out words to the various churches throughout the world. And I want to look specifically at the church of Thyatira, because it's important. It gives a very solid idea of what's kind of happening in the church, what will be happening in the church, what is happening in the church. To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, this is Revelation 3:18, mind you, 2:18. These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely. Unless they repent of her ways, I will strike her children dead. Then all the churches will know that I am he who searches the hearts and minds, and I will repay each of you according to your deeds. Now I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, to you who do not hold to her teaching, and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets, I will not impose any other burden on you, except to hold on to what you have until I come. To the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. That one will rule them with an iron scepter and will dash them to pieces like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. I focus on Thyatira for this reason. He starts off initially talking about Thyatira and the beauty of this church that is doing so much good. But then Jesus goes on to express the point about this Jezebel spirit, this Jezebel that's in the church, preaching about sexual immorality as being okay. This is something that's prevalent in our churches nowadays. There's all kinds of places where the things that God has ordained as incorrect, where he has ordained it as unrighteous and unholy, are being treated as acceptable because the world has permeated into the churches. Where the reason why I say that the fivefold ministry is so powerful, okay? Look at it this way. If you know anything about history, you might have heard of a star fortress. So back in after the Middle Ages, kind of during the Renaissance, through to the Industrial Revolution, fortresses were still a thing. There were still people building fortresses. But what they realized was that the most powerful, the most effective form of fortress was not, the typical castle with walls, but rather a fortress shaped like a star with 5 sides that were able to watch over one another. Angled edges, peaks with pointed edges that where guns could be placed, and that was the thing. These star fortresses started to become a more prevalent thing because the way that they were designed was much more effective. It was much more effective at handling cannons and guns and things like that than the traditional castle walls. Traditional castle walls were just a single wall. All you had to do was line up the cannons and pop the rounds into it to bring the whole thing down. You could collapse the whole wall. But these star fortresses were designed differently. Those angled edges meant the cannonballs could easily just slide off of them as they were fired off. Think about that. Why is a 5-sided thing more effective than a straight line thing? Look at what we're talking about. It all comes together in the fact that the fivefold ministry is going to be far stronger. When you have all 5 of these offices working together in unison, it's going to be far harder to penetrate that. So you don't have... I have seen personally what it looks like for the Jezebel spirits to come around a church and to infiltrate them and start spreading immorality as righteousness. We live in Oregon. It's pretty common. There's a lot of churches out there that have that going on. You have to ignore significant swaths of the Bible, even the words of Jesus himself, in order to believe some of the things that these people believe, but they've found a way to do it. And that's the thing, is that the Bible isn't enough. Okay? No matter how deep in your understanding, you will never be able to convince everybody with just the Bible itself. They need to have experiences with Jesus themselves. Because at the end of the day, each office brings a piece of the story. They bring a part of it, but they don't bring the whole thing. And that's why we need each other. Jesus isn't a fool. Like, he didn't design... Jesus, when God designed us, he didn't design us to exist separate from him. You understand? Jesus didn't engineer the church so that one person could run out there and do the whole thing. Okay? So-and-so ministry, Bob Richardson Ministries is fine and all, but if Bob Richardson is the only person preaching, pastoring, prophesying, laying hands on the sick, doing the whole thing, it's too much. And that's actually actively against the design that Jesus had for the church. Now, there are plenty of times when people end up in that position where they're all by themselves, and it's a circumstance of the time. I understand that. And don't think that this is a rebuke for those people, but rather it is simply to say that that's not what it's designed to look like. That's not the way it's meant to be. So there's a place here where we need to start surrendering ourselves and surrendering our churches to the vision that Jesus had for us. I quote John 17. We go back and we'll glance at it real quick. Yeah, John 17:20. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, and they may be one as we are one. I and them, you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me.
Wow.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Jesus is praying for the whole world through us, through our unity. The world is meant to be touched. They're meant to see him.
Wow.
And that's the thing. That's the thing. That's what happens when we are all connected to each other, when we're unified to each other, when we're working together and we are surrendered to him and his vision and his goals. That's the power that comes from that. That's the world changing effect that comes from that. We can't do it all by ourselves. He didn't pray for that. He didn't pray that Scott from accounting could become a earth-shattering evangelist who was going to go and change the tides of the world. No, there's meant to be a team. There's meant to be a whole church. He prayed for us together, not us individually to do the work. So as we conclude this and we look at it, we're meant to be one body working together in unison. A body doesn't function separately. That when it does, it becomes diseased. That's what autoimmune diseases are. It's when your body turns on itself. Parts of your body stop working correctly with the other parts of your body. Usually it's your immune system. Usually it turns on itself. It starts attacking your blood cells or attacking your nerve tissue. It just depends on what happens. Cancer is overactive cells creating problems. It's more parasitic in appearance to me, but that's the thing, is that there's this whole thing here where when our bodies turn against themselves, it makes us sick. So why in the church do we treat it so different? Where we should be unifying, where we should be coming together, we are instead letting divisions last, and then we're justifying them. We even create whole doctrines around why they should exist. That's how we end up with denominations.
Yeah.
Jesus was non-denominational. He didn't have Jesus was definitely not like, you know what? There's going to be this one group. They're going to be called the Baptists. And they're going to transcend all the other churches because they will worship me better. And he definitely didn't say there will be this one church called the Pentecostals. They will rise up, and in their zeal for me, they will truly bless me above all the other churches. No. No. He prayed for us to be unified as one whole thing.
Wow. It's true.
Literally, it's in the Bible.
He wasn't concerned with one being right.
No, he wasn't.
He's like, nobody's right unless we're unified.
Yeah. And if it didn't come across, what Heather said was,
It's the unity that's going to show Christ.
it's the unity that's going to show Christ. That he called for us all to be unified.
Not being the most right.
Not being the most right. And that's important. Because, see, at the end of the day, the big thing that really divides us is pride. That's it. When you boil it down, 9 times out of 10, pride is the big dividing factor in the church. Well, my church knows better. Does it, though? Does it have everything down? Like, part of this message, we're reading out of John 17. Do you know how many people have never read John 17?
No.
Think about it. Like, you yourself, watching this video, have you read that chapter before? Do you remember anything from that chapter? It's literally Jesus praying for you. It might be worth a read. It's his last prayer before he gets led off to be crucified. And it's for you. At the end of the day, there's this reality that we need to be we need to live as Christians. That is, people who are following Jesus. You can say Christian, which means little Christ. It's an old insult from the Romans. Or you can say a follower of the way, which is what Christians originally called themselves. However you want to go about that, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're still following Jesus. That's what's important. So why would we not also have our churches be surrendered to him? Why would our churches not also be following him? Why would the leadership of the church not also be following him? If he calls for us to be unified, then we should be unifying. If he calls for us to have him as the head, then he should be the head. He's not dead. As it turns out, he's quite alive and well and completely capable of leading his own church. We just need to be willing to lay it down before him to let him do so. And that's where we're the most powerful. Christians are not built to be powerhouses standing atop the bare skulls of their enemies piled up so that they can crush them all at once. No, we're a people whose true power is when we are on our knees, surrendered and letting God be God. You will see more people saved when you let Jesus meet them than you will find if you throw Pascal's wager at them or argue them into coming to church. There's a time and a place for all of that, but the reality is salvation isn't going to come through it. The biggest thing that we need now, what I'll end on, is coming to appreciate the differences, the diversity of heart cries that Jesus has designed. He has called them forward in all of us. We break it down to 5, but even as I talked about with the different ones, each office has subcategories. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. Because Jesus wants to save the world. He didn't die so that we could argue about who was right about speaking in tongues as a means of illustrating salvation. He died so that the world could be saved. He died so that sin could be defeated, and he came back to life so that death could be defeated. So that all of us could see and be free of sin and death. And we need to be bringing people in to meet that, to learn that, to know that, to feel that, and to be able to understand that. That is where their salvation comes in. The long and short answer of the conclusion to the Spiritual Offices series is that when the spiritual offices are all working together, the world gets saved. Yeah. It sounds really big, but
it is.
It's completely feasible through Jesus. And we're meant to manifest that. We're meant to help. And this is how we help most effectively. So, pray for understanding. Pray for a clarity of vision.
Yes.
Pray for a ability to honor the differences in the people who are also in leadership. Maybe try to understand them instead of arguing with them. Try to see what they see. Yeah, there are some people in leadership who are bad. There are some people in leadership who have no idea what they're doing. But then there are plenty of people, what I think happens most often in leadership in the church is that there are people with a different heart cry
Yeah.
who are seeing a different need than you. And if you can understand that, then maybe you can complement each other. And maybe you can begin uniting as one singular body. Especially when you start surrendering everything to Jesus. That's when things take off. But yeah. That's what I got.